Driver transfers. Some drivers maybe even leaving the sport, and we've had a hectic few races since we've last been with you. All this and more coming up on the House Call Sports. So yeah, as I was saying, we have got a lot to talk about and not a lot of time to do it. Dustin, how are we? It's been a while.
Yes, it has been a while. I want to apologize to you guys. I had some personal stuff going on, some medical stuff I had to get taken care of, but hopefully we're going to be back in the fold now. Hopefully either weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the race weekends, we can push content out to you guys. I do apologize. Bear with us. We're going to kind of recap quite a bit that's been happening over the last few weeks, so we'll just dive right into that.
Yeah, it has, and there's been no shortage of action both on track and off it. And I think we'll start with the most recent bit of news that we've had. I mean, it's been coming thick and fast over the past few days and even the past few weeks, but the most recent bit of news, and it involves your team, Red Bull Racing. Now, they had us, didn't they? They had us, they timed it, the little fuckers. They started a little broadcast channel, and they knew that Ocon was getting fucked off by Alpine, so it was like, right, stay tuned. Who knows? Who the fuck? As if, oh yeah, we're going to be signing Esteban Ocon and then pulling a fucking gigantic swerve 24 hours later by announcing that Sergio Perez has re-signed until the end of 2026. Now, Dustin, what do you make of this? Do you think Sergio Perez is the right man to partner Max Verstappen?
I mean, I'll be frank with you, right? So, I mean, we had a couple driver options in the field, right? But we all know it's no secret with Carlos Sainz being very aggressive with his teammate. Obviously, even in his last year with Ferrari, he's still very aggressive with Charles Leclerc. So realistically, yes, Carlos was originally a Red Bull guy, and I would love to see him come back. But you're talking about a three-time, possibly this year, a four-time world champion in Max Verstappen. He is at the forefront of that team. And you don't really want to bring someone in that's going to cause issues with that. Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon have had nothing but issues since they've joined up at Alpine. You know, Carlos Sainz, like I said, he has issues, with Lewis Hamilton moving over to Ferrari. I think that, Sergio Perez brings I think he brings vital information to the team. Like, he's a great driver. Obviously, he's not a championship caliber driver. He's not going to win a world championship, but he is a great teammate for Max. And I think this was the right business decision, especially financially, what he brings in with his father and everything like that. So, I think that, Red Bull made the right call. But I think this will probably be Sergio's last contract with Red Bull. And I think that's why you see it being a 2-year deal. I think after this, this will line up right around with where Max is talking about. If Max wins 2 more world titles, he's obviously shown interest in not staying around like Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso and, even the great Seb himself. Max doesn't have interest in the sport longevity-wise, or at least that's what he's hinted at. He's done what he set out to do, and if he wins 4 or 5 world championships, it's hard to argue that he's not one of the greatest of all time, especially at his age and the success level he's had. And with Newey leaving, it's going to be difficult for Red Bull moving forward. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, you mentioned Sebastian Vettel there, and that was another name that was being thrown about for a potential return to the F1 grid for next year, especially by the Sebastian Vettel fangirls who were delusionally hoping that he would maybe get a seat at Mercedes or Red Bull for next year. But those rumours, I think, have been firmly squashed. And I don't know about this one. I really don't. I mean, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people, especially Daniel Ricciardo fans, disappointed that Red Bull has signed this new contract. But for me, it depends. There's 2 different perspectives here, I reckon, because there's one way of looking at it, which is, okay, Red Bull have managed to tie down Sergio Perez because they know that he's probably not going to be able to challenge Max at all. And that's the kind of dynamic they want in the team. They want Max to be the face of domination. They want him to piss every race, and they don't want any threat from within. But again, F1 is a team sport, and if you've got a driver, okay, you've got one driver who's predicted to be winning every single race in the calendar, but then you've got one driver who's crashing all the time, who struggles to make it out of Q1, Q2, in a car that is the best car on the grid. You've got to think of it from a team perspective and say, right, we've got one driver who's delivering, but one driver who isn't. So, look, we don't need 2 GOATs in a team. We don't need a Max Verstappen. We don't need a Lewis Hamilton next to him in the same car. But we just want someone who maybe is not going to push Verstappen and, cause incidents like Daniel Ricciardo used to do. but we don't want someone who's lounging. I don't know what the fucking word is. Like, who's just wasting at the back in this championship-winning car.
I mean, also too, you have to consider this. Like people, they always harp on the second seat in Red Bull. Like, let's face it, Red Bull doesn't have 2 drivers; they have 4. So they can pull any of the other 2 drivers from the other team up at any second and swap them out. They can move the drivers around as they please. That's the way that team is structured. That's the way those 2 teams are structured. So don't put too much stock in just Sergio Perez, because Sergio could get bumped down if the team needed that. So people often forget that it's not like Mercedes where like they have, like Williams is technically, their lower grade team, but like there's more than just, there's more logistical issues that go into moving, drivers from those teams up to Mercedes. But Red Bull doesn't have that issue. You know what I'm saying? Like it's the same parent company. There's no red tape in the way. Like we've seen it with Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon. We've seen it over the years multiple times. Like if you don't cut, if you're not putting up what you need to cut, good scores and put points on the board for the constructors at Red Bull, they will axe you. It is not a matter of, they do not care who you are. I think Sergio's a great teammate for Max. He pushes Max, but he is not going to compete for a world championship with Max. However, Sergio's consistent enough that he's not going to tear the car up that frequently, and he's going to put points on the board for the constructors. Now, if Sergio stops doing that, if he starts falling outside the points, you'll see a move. Trust me. They're not going to let Daniel Ricciardo walk from this. Daniel Ricciardo is still very much in the talks of being in that Red Bull seat. I guarantee you behind the scenes, Christian Horner is he's no slouch. Like he doesn't put himself in a corner. Like he knows how to manage a team very well. And he has 4 drivers. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like with Yuki. I'm not a huge fan of Yuki personally. I think he has a lot of talent, but I think at the end of the day, he has grown over the past few years. But I just don't think he's ever going to fill that Red Bull seat. So I think eventually he'll leave, and we'll see what happens, who they bring in. But quite frankly, I'm not worried at all with Red Bull. The question is with Carlos turning down that contract offer he got offered for Audi to join them in 2026. What's going to happen with Carlos? And then Esteban, he's still not signed anywhere. I suspect that Carlos is either eyeing that Mercedes seat and or Toto. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. Toto is eyeing Carlos for that seat, and or he's eyeing possibly, like, I know that the rumors are out there. I know like we kind of haven't figured out what's going on with that, but I don't know. As of today, I haven't seen an update on what Toto's plans are for that seat. I haven't seen any crazy announcement for that yet. So,
no, well, we knew there were going to be quite a lot of drivers. I think 15 drivers at the start of the year were out of contract come December, whatever it is. But we did. I mean, come on, no one could have predicted it would be this hectic. And just touching back before we move on the whole Red Bull situation, this kind of reminds me of the direction they could have taken. Would have been very similar to McLaren did in 2022. With the way they handled Daniel Ricciardo. Now, it's practically the exact same. But, again, the point I'm about to make has a very strong parallel, because think back to when McLaren, their situation in 2022, you had Lando, who was arguably very much overdriving that car. He was getting results that nobody was expecting with the state that McLaren were in. But then again, you had a driver who wasn't delivering in Daniel Ricciardo. He wasn't getting the results that the car would warrant, which is, sort of in the middle of the midfield. You can't get any more midfield for that. You're expected to be challenging for points, when the only position he was really challenging for was like 14th, 15th. So they had to let him go. But I think the only reason they did let him go was because they knew that they had a very promising young driver in Oscar Piastri. But I don't think Red Bull have a driver like that who's ready to just make the jump immediately. Okay, you could say maybe Yuki Tsunoda, but as you mentioned, he has improved since his first season. But he's not quite at the level yet where he can just be pushed straight into the Red Bull seat and expected to challenge. But again, you've got drivers like Liam Lawson, who I don't think are ready either, who I think should have been on the grid this year with AlphaTauri or Racing Bulls. And I would have liked to have seen Daniel Ricciardo and Liam Lawson in the same team. And I think Yuki maybe could have become the Red Bull reserve driver or something. I don't know.
I think with that, I don't really want to dive too deep into it because Christian knows what he's doing. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of controversy around Red Bull this season in general, coming in from the offseason into this season. I don't think Red Bull's trying to make wakes. And with the departure of Nuni, It's going to be difficult for Red Bull. I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. You know what I mean? Like, we've had a long history of being at the top, but not necessarily always at the top. Mercedes had their run, and now we're back there. And Christian says it best. It's hard to stay. It's hard to stay in that position. Like when you're at the top, there's only one way to go, and that's down. And let's be realistic here. Mercedes is making leaps and bounds. McLaren is making leaps and bounds and coming back. And Ferrari, if they can just get their strategy straight, which they're doing a lot better this year under Fred, I think that, I think it's honestly up for grabs. I think the next few years are going to be exactly what F1 wanted, and I think it's going to be a lot more close racing. So truth be told, when you talk about that seat, Daniel Ricciardo, when he gets signed back to AlphaTauri now, I don't know what the hell we're actually calling that team now. I always want to call it. I always want to call it AlphaTauri. Still to this day. But regardless, when Daniel ran practice runs at Silverstone in the Red Bull, he was literally he was qualifying on par with Max in that car. So it's not like Daniel doesn't have the ability to be in that seat. And I think the thing with McLaren, unfortunately for Daniel, is it became a confidence thing. You know what I mean? He felt like that's why he left Red Bull originally, is because the confidence, he thought he was the next, world champion at Red Bull. And when they put all that stock in Max, it kind of got to his head and he left, and then he unfortunately had that, season that wasn't awful, wasn't great with Renault. And then that relationship ended and he was eyeing that McLaren seat because he thought that was his best chance. And unfortunately, McLaren just could not get out of their own way at the time. And I think Daniel, when he was there, I think it was mostly confidence. I don't think it was driver ability. That car was built around Lando too. So you're talking about two different driving styles, two different drivers. So it's one of those things that, I don't put too much stock in stuff like that with Daniel. But, Liam, I don't think he's ready to take that jump yet. I just don't see a ton of youth drivers, honestly, that impress me to the levels of saying, oh yes, let's move on from Sergio. You know what I mean? If we could have acquired, honestly, the only driver on the field that I would love to see back in a Red Bull is Daniel. And outside of Daniel, if it's not going to be Daniel, then if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know what I mean? And Sergio's been a great teammate to Max outside of that 1 year in Monaco where their relationship kind of got rocky. But quite frankly, I don't put too much stock in that kind of stuff. I think the bigger question is, I don't know if you've seen the reports about the engines, though. They want to go back to the V10s is what they want to go back to.
Please, for the love of God, please, I am begging. That would make my fucking life, I swear.
Yeah, and with, like I was saying, though, with the race, we got to see how this next package is really going to roll out, because ultimately at the end of the day, they're calling for some off-the-wall changes. And if we're being honest with you, and Max said it last weekend, I believe, the Monaco, let's be realistic. We run that race specifically for the history and the nostalgia. That race is awful. It is the most boring race on the circuit. It is absolutely atrocious to watch. Outside of the history of that race, it sucks. Pretty much where you qualify is where you will finish. You know what I'm saying? I think this year 1 through 10 qualified 1 through 10, and they finished 1 through 10.
First time it's ever happened. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's never any overtakes there. The cars are too big for that track. And you see, Max was talking about it, and this might be coming from a Red Bull biased fan standpoint, but the cars are, whether you like Red Bull or not, the cars are way too big for that track. They are way too big. And, Red Bull, the car wasn't designed for that track. It's not. It's designed for all the other circuits that are out there, and when Red Bull is in a normal race weekend this season, you see them dominate usually. But tracks like Monaco neutralize that because, quite frankly, the car is massive. And, moving forward, this is something that the FIA is going to have to address. This is a serious, Formula One's going to have to address this in general. What are we going to do for the rules? Because these cars are, we're losing some very valuable racing ability on these cornerstones of the F1 circuit every single year. How many more years are we going to go down this road with Monaco where we don't have a competitive race?
Yeah, well, to be fair, that's why I'm saying a lot of people trip up over the new regulations. They're saying that people are saying that it's just the power units, it's just the engines. It's not. It's a massive overhaul of literally everything: aerodynamics, chassis, bodywork, the lot. And I think they're actually shortening the wheelbases of the car as well. So who knows? Maybe we could see a bit of an improvement when it comes to Monaco, because let's face it, there is no fucking way that race is ever leaving the calendar.
No.
Like, and that is the one thing I will applaud Liberty Media and the FIA for doing, is normally they don't give a fuck about tradition. You see that with the new races, Miami, Las Vegas. The talks for proposing a race around the streets of Chicago, I believe, for 2028, 29.
So the reason they're doing that is because NASCAR is doing it, and it's a big hit within NASCAR. Like NASCAR's dying, and let's be realistic, they're dying. But in the U.S., they still have the highest viewer ratings of any motorsport in the United States. So the reason that that Formula One is trying to move in that direction is they're trying to draw more of that. Let's be realistic. America has a lot of money when it comes to entertainment. That's why they have it in Miami. That's why they have the Miami Grand Prix. It's a huge seller. They make a ton of money when they go to Miami. They make a ton of money when they went to Las Vegas. And let's face it, Las Vegas, we all thought it was going to be a bust last year, and it actually turned out to be one of the best races of the season, ironically. Yeah. So I think ultimately it comes down to, you have to look at the market. You have to gauge it. There's only so many places you can go in America. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's be realistic. They're not going to take away the Race of Americas, down in Austin. Like, that's staying. Miami's staying. It's a huge hit. And Vegas, if it's like it was last year and it continues on, like they're doing that for 10 years total contract from the first race to the end. So I don't imagine that if it continues to be as successful as it is for Formula One, that they move away from that. I only see them adding dates to the calendar. And whether we like to admit it or not, there's a lot of political stuff that goes on with Formula One, taking the Russian Grand Prix away, taking away or staying out of China for a few years, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So the dates for like China, you're going to see a lot of stuff move around as this political, as much as I hate to say that it impacts Formula One, it does, because they travel to all these places. They're not going to go to places that are war torn. You know what I mean? And let's be realistic. America's a safe bet for entertainment. You know what I mean? You have the cameras, you have the infrastructure, you have everything you need. You have the security to know your drivers and your teams are safe. The logistical standpoint's already there because they figured it out for Miami. They figured it out for the Race of Americas, the American Grand Prix. They figured it out for Las Vegas. Like there's security in adding another date to another American date to the calendar. But we'll see how it goes. Honestly, it's gonna come down. Formula One is watching NASCAR very closely to see how they perform in Chicago overall. And if Formula One sees the market for it there, make no mistake, they will seize that opportunity. You know what I mean? And that's just kind of how that's how I see that playing out. It wouldn't surprise me, but I would love to see that the cars get smaller. I would love to see the wheelbases shortened. I would love to see everything in general. I love this idea. And don't get me wrong, this year is kind of closer than it was last year. But this move to make the circuits and the races more close, you know what I mean? Like, no one wants to see a driver piss off into the distance with 13 or 26 seconds and win the race. And like, I know Lewis Hamilton said that, and he complains a lot about it. But let's be realistic. We watched Lewis Hamilton do it for damn near 7 years. Like, like he has no room to talk. Like, he has been the beneficiary of a fantastic car almost his entire career with Mercedes. And like, I'm not going to sit here and knock him on it because he did win those world championships. And, Valtteri Bottas, when he was there, he had the same car and he didn't perform at the level of Lewis Hamilton. So I'm not trying to take away what Lewis did, but Lewis did piss off into the distance for many, many years. But I do love that they're moving more towards a closer, racing. It's more interesting to see cars compete and overtake. And, quite frankly, I know the teams don't like to see it on their bottom line, but I love to see when, there's some excitement, there's some crashes. Obviously I want all the drivers to be okay. I want them to walk away healthy every single time. I wish no ill will on any driver at all. But, it is interesting to see as a fan, from a fan perspective, when you see that crash, like it scares you for a brief moment, especially if it's a high G, high impact crash. But when they walk away, you're like, holy shit, man, my adrenaline was just It's like in my chest. Like, and realistically, we can talk about it all we want, but we love seeing that kind of stuff as long as the driver walks away healthy. And, I think that, if you get smaller circuits, more interesting venues, it's transitioning. Formula One is becoming a massive, motorsport, globally. It's always been big in Europe, obviously, but it's getting bigger and bigger every single year in America. And with that comes, you're going to have to, whether we like to admit it or not, you're going to have to appease to, when there's going to come a point to where it's going to become more popular, probably in the United States, than NASCAR. And when that happens, you're going to have to do something to keep the attention of that fan base, because, like, you're not trying to watch like me. When I watch the Grand Prix, I'm up at like 4 a.m. in the morning trying to watch them, based out of where I'm at, or 3 a.m. in the morning. Like, I have to record it and rewatch it. So I think that you're going to see a lot of shifts with the new package. Audi coming back, Andretti trying to eye an additional team to the grid, adding 2 more cars in total, which I'm not quite sure why the FIA turned him down, like why Formula One rejected his bid with Cadillac, because ultimately I think they have a fear of expansion. I don't know their actual reasoning behind it, but let's face it, like the grid, the paddocks are all built for 12 teams, so they can sustain another team. Like, they have to be, every track they race at has to be built for 12 teams. So I'm like, they have the room to expand the grid. I think that they're trying to eye, as much as I don't want to say it, like Ford's coming back with the engine supplier for Red Bull in 2026. And with GM, like, let's be realistic. If you watch the Le Mans last year, for example, Chevy put that Garage 56 entry in with that massive ass stock car that was just absolutely annihilating all the Ferraris and stuff like that. And everybody's like, oh, it's a Garage 56 entry. But let's be realistic. That car performed a lot better than anyone in Europe or anywhere else in the world thought it would. And it drew a lot of attention. You know what I mean? It drew a lot of attention from America. Like, there was a lot of Americans that stayed up for the first time ever and watched the Le Mans. Like, let's be realistic. Like, it was a huge hit. And just hearing that car just rumble the way that it did, I think Formula One is trying to fight back the full takeover, because when Ford joined, they knew GM was not far behind, right? Let's be realistic. GM doesn't do anything that Ford doesn't do, and vice versa. If one goes one way, they both go that way. And I think that, they're trying to eye, they don't want the American companies to take over fully. Like, I know that sounds kind of like conspiracy theorist, and that's not my intention, but I think that it's so quickly and so fast. Like, you're seeing America take like really big like chunks out of this market for other manufacturers, other teams, other countries. And I think that they're trying to slow that down to an extent. It's not that they're against it. They want the money. They want the popularity. They want to grow. But like, at what point do you say, holy shit, like, this is happening so fast? You know what I mean?
You made quite a few good points there. I mean, I was watching the podcast by, who was it, David Coulthard, Eddie Jordan. They had Gunter Steiner on as a guest. And the thing about the Andretti getting rejected, it wasn't so much saying no. It was saying, come back with GM in 2028, and then we'll see what happens from there. So they weren't exactly saying no. And I think that the whole point of Andretti trying to get in, and the whole decision and reviewing process, was, can Andretti bring in more money to the sport than they're taking away from the other teams? Because you can see why, if it went to a consensus vote between the other team principals, especially the team principals of the smaller teams like Haas and Williams and Sauber, they would have all been saying, well, no, absolutely not, because they're taking away a very big cut of what we're currently getting in revenue. And if we're having to operate to a cost cap, when we might not even be able to afford to get up to that, because we're now having our slice of the pie shortened severely because somebody else is coming in. And I don't know, but another thing you were saying is races we'd like to keep or get rid of. And to be fair, if Miami was anything like it was 3 and a bit weeks ago, fucking beam me up, Scotty. I want it on every year. Because we've gone from Red Bull bias to now McLaren bias. And when I tell you I didn't sit down for the last half of that fucking race, honestly, it was so weird, because I can't even remember what caused that safety car. Was it?
So it was the little bitty it has a name, but the little pillar, the little cone that sat up in the chicane. So Max hit it.
You need to look this shit up one sec.
No, I'm dead serious. So Max hit it, and it messed up. Well, at first, everyone thought it messed up his front wing, but it messed up his underfloor, and that's what caused him to lack pace at the end of the race. But it threw it out in the middle of the raceway, and I think George Russell, imagine that, hit it or something like that. Osama bin Russell just crashing into something on the track. It's not necessarily, especially if it's touched a Red Bull. If it's touched a Red Bull, he's gonna hit it. I promise you that. So it was kind of a crazy scenario that went out there, and I'm happy for Lando. Max finished second, so I'm not disappointed. However, I also understand that the underfloor of that Red Bull is really severely damaged from all that.
Massive hole in it, yeah. I'm just glad now that the Lando no wins joke's gone, because that was getting so fucking old so fast. And he does say that Sochi 2021 had a big, he said that he wasn't really thinking about. Come on, we know he was. Last few laps, he was definitely thinking, what if I fuck it away like I did in Russia? But no, to be fair, he didn't. And then we all went into Imola and Monaco thinking, well, hang on a minute. Could there be a genuine championship fight now? And could McLaren and Norris actually be involved? And I think Piastri as well should have been involved had he not been completely wiped out by Carlos Sainz and took his fucking front wing off and then dropped down to, 16th?
Yeah, so I think, I just want to go back and touch on one thing that you mentioned about earlier, and then I'll finish off on this topic. And I do agree with you, that race, the Miami Grand Prix was a great race weekend. It was. Outside of it being absurdly fucking hot for the drivers and the fans, which is a serious concern of mine, and it happens every year. And what is it, Abu Dhabi or Dubai or
Qatar? I think Qatar was the one.
Yeah, Qatar. Yeah. So it's like every year, they put these dates on the calendar, and it's great and everything, but it's hot as fucking Miami year round. You could honestly flip the Vegas and Miami Grand Prix, so that way that Vegas is more in the, because when the sun goes down in Vegas, it gets cold, but earlier in the year, it pretty much stays the same in Vegas year round, and same thing for Miami. You move Miami to October, so that way, the drivers, they're finishing off. It does cool down a little bit, but not really a lot in Miami. But then to go back to one of the things you said about the cost of adding another team to the grid, make no mistake, these TV contracts and stuff like that, adding another team, especially an American team, is going to do nothing but bring more money into the sport, ultimately. Now, yes, the smaller teams are going to, struggle with that, and, it adds more competition onto the grid. So teams that struggle like Haas, and Williams and stuff like that, they obviously don't want to be pushed further down into at the end of the year standings and get less money if they finish at the bottom. But at the end of the day, that has nothing to do with Andretti. You as a team manager, as a team principal, and as an investment group, invest the money into your team. It's not up to another team to worry about your financial situation. If you can't put a car out there that can perform, maybe it's time you move on from the sport. We're talking about an entertainment sport. We're not talking about, cool, Williams has history. Awesome, I get it. But at the end of the day, Williams hasn't been competitive since the 90s and early 2000s. What are we talking about here? If Williams can't put a car out on the grid that's going to compete, that's not my problem. And that shouldn't be Andretti's problem. You know what I mean? And they shouldn't have to wait. They shouldn't have to wait for, another whenever, they say 2028, but they'll probably push out farther than that. They shouldn't have to wait that long to put a bid in. A name like Andretti, it carries weight. It's something you want in the sport. And General Motors, let's be realistic. That's not a company you want to turn away or piss off. You know what I mean? They bring a lot of money and a lot of advancements into something of this caliber. And that's something you want on the docket, in my personal opinion. So, I think that they're going to have to revisit that decision. And ultimately, I think that they're going to, if the market, America, keeps growing, I think they're really going to piss off the American fan base if they don't allow that, because let's be realistic. Chevrolet dominates NASCAR. Chevrolet's dominated pretty much anything that GM has entered. GM has dominated. And same thing with Ford. Ford, I think, is an engine supplier for Formula One. They've supplied 26, I think, constructors champions over the years, I think, as an engine supplier or something insane like that. because I think at one point in time, weren't they paired up with Williams or something like that? Or one of the teams that doesn't exist anymore. Shit, I can't remember off the top of my head. But regardless, like, it's something we're going to have to cross as fans, and it's something that F1 is going to have to address sooner rather than later. But going back to your point about Lando and Piastri, like, yes, I love that Lando finally got his first win out of the way. I mean, he's been due for it for a while, and he looks like he's on an uptick. He's got confidence, like McLaren has confidence now. They needed that as a team. I really like to see 4 teams at the top. Mercedes is kind of in a down rut, and I'll be honest with you, I don't think Toto has it in him anymore to build that team back up. He's a billionaire, dude. Like, he doesn't have, like, he hasn't invested in it, but he's a billionaire whether they win or lose. He doesn't, like, ultimately, how much does he really care? Like, letting Lewis walk away, like, come on, man. And to Ferrari at that, like, what are you doing here? You know what I'm saying? Like, Fred couldn't have offered him that much of a better deal. It had to come down to the design of the car. And it's because Toto was unwilling to completely scrap the designs that he had and move on and try to rebuild with Lewis's opinion. I know they released that little, docuseries saying that, Toto was like agreeing with Lewis, oh yes, we'll scrap this design, but he didn't. Like, the Mercedes still isn't competitive. So, like, obviously Lewis was like, screw this. I'm not getting younger. I want that 8th championship, because no matter where you're at, right? The most championships ever won by any driver in any motorsport is 7. You know what I'm saying? And that's a very elite group to be in. But Lewis wants that 8th one bad, and he's going to go where he thinks he can get it.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I'm not sure that's entirely the reason why John's a Ferrari. I think it's because Toto Wolff has an immense amount of respect, as you would, for Lewis Hamilton. Like, if you're the boss of a driver who's given you 6 world championships, you've got to love him. And I think that he just doesn't want to stand in the way of Lewis Hamilton's absolute dream. And if you'd have asked him, when he was at McLaren, the past 11 years he's been at Mercedes, if you asked him, what other team do you want to drive for? 100% he says Ferrari. And I think Toto realises that. He's seen the links, he's seen everything. I think Lewis might have come down and had a word with him. So he's seen that and gone, look, do you want to go to Ferrari that bad? And have they given you an offer? If the answer to both of those is yes, I'm not going to stop you. Feel free to go. Because as much as you've done for us, or as much as I'd love to keep you around, I don't want to be what gets in between you and a potentially dream drive for you. So I don't know if it was necessarily the fact that Lewis is frustrated with the overall design of the Mercedes car and the direction which the team is going, because then I think you'd see George Russell having something to say about it. I don't think George Russell's actually had anything to say about the overall direction that the team's going in.
Well, I think sorry.
No. I don't know. I'm quite interested, to be fair, to see how, as I'm sure everyone else is, to see how the grid ends up lining up for next year. And there's a few things that we do know. For example, we do know Lewis Hamilton is going to Ferrari. We do know Nico Hülkenberg is going to Sauber. We do know that Sergio Perez is staying at Red Bull. We do know that Alex Albon is staying at Williams. But what we don't know is where half the fucking grid is going. So the two sort of focal points so far, well, in the past few days now, have been Esteban Ocon and Carlos Sainz. Now, there's been a lot of different things, a lot of speculation throwing about, a lot of rumours. So I'm interested to hear what you think about particularly those two, and about like just how everything's going to shape up, especially in the sort of lower end of the field. Because honestly, as much as it hurts to say it, that is where I see both of them going. Because I think it's written in the stars at this point to see Esteban Ocon and Oliver Behrman in Haas next season. I think that's practically nailed on, because you've got Nico Hülkenberg leaving the team, which we already know, to go to Sauber. And then you've got Kevin Magnussen, who over the past few race weekends has just decided, right, rules? What rules? What regulations? Fuck them, right? I'm driving how I want to drive. And if you want to try and pass, you're going to fucking... Lewis, come here. No. So that's pretty much what Magnussen's been doing over the past few races. And with Hülkenberg obviously leaving, that pretty much, from the moment that got announced, opened the door for Ollie Behrman to join Haas, because he's been their reserve driver. We saw him getting thrown literally in the fucking fire pit of hell in Saudi Arabia. Imagine that being your F1 debut. a race in Saudi Arabia in Jeddah. Come on. And he still managed to finish P7. So he's nailed on, I think, to join Haas at the end of the season. And this is where I think it gets interesting, because I genuinely think that we know, I think it's pretty much all but confirmed now that that Hulkenberg is taking Zhou Guanyu's seat. As much as I like him as a person, as a driver, he's just not delivering. So I don't think we'll see him on the grid at all for next season. But I do think that Carlos Sainz now is going to join Sauber. I know he's had pretty strong talks with Williams. Williams have had a pretty decent offer for him. And that is actually where I see Valtteri Bottas heading up, going back to where he started. Because if Williams are reaching out when they've already got Alex Albon secured under contract for a few years, they're just penning him onto a multi-year deal now. That shows just how little faith they've got in Logan Sargent. So if they're going out and talking to other drivers, exploring the market per se, they cannot trust Logan Sargent in the slightest. So I think if they were looking at Carlos Sainz and he goes to Audi or Sauber for next year, that leaves a very strong driver in Valtteri Bottas that they could say and go, hang on, maybe we would want Bottas back, you know. And I do think that would be a very strong driver pairing for next season. Would be Albon in one car, Bottas in the other. Who says no? But I'm interested to see what you think on that. Who do you think is going where?
So we're running out of time here, but I'll just touch on it really quickly. Truth be told, the driver market is so crazy right now. I don't know. And I do agree with you that you, as a team principal, you have to sit down, you have to evaluate real talent, right? But let's not forget, Williams is also the minor team for Mercedes, right? Valtteri was kind of, I don't want to say pushed out of Mercedes, but we all knew the George Russell move was coming. But now that Lewis is out, I wouldn't be surprised if Valtteri doesn't go back into that Mercedes seat, ultimately, because he was very good with Mercedes. Outside of Lewis, he was very good. He doesn't get enough credit for that, but he performed really well. Esteban Ocon and Carlos Sainz, it's really going to be tricky as to where they go, because they're both two competitive drivers that a lot of times they get hot-headed and they let that get in the way of team orders and this, that, and the next. Now, Carlos is a very good race car driver. You know, he's very good driver. But with that comes that attitude, and you know, ultimately we'll see how that turns out. The Logan Sargent instance, I think, is one of those things that goes back to confidence. Let's be realistic. Williams is a shit car. It is a shit car. And Alex Albon, you know, he's having success now, but he had failure early in his career with Red Bull, and he kind of understands that this situation is a lot less low pressure than the Red Bull situation. So I think he's comfortable in his own skin, and he's figured it out. Logan Sargent, you know, I think he has a lot of talent, but I think that car is just god awful. I think it's just atrociously bad. And I think he needs to hit the reset button. So we'll see where that goes. You know, ultimately, with less than a minute left here, I can dive into it more in depth on another episode, but you know, I'm interested to see how this is going to shake out. But realistically, I think you're going to see Valtteri go back into that Mercedes seat. That's my prediction. That's what I see happening. Toto has no ill will with Valtteri, and he was you know what you're getting with Valtteri. You know what I mean? And George, you know, he's just happy not to be in a Williams. So, and he's actually outperformed Lewis, quite frankly, in a lot of races, in my opinion, in that car. So he's staying there. Obviously, he's under contract. There's no issues there. But, you know, we'll hit it more in the next episode.